Who's excited to vote? I'm actually going to be in Wellington for September 23rd, and I'm really excited about it. I'm in the centre of politics for the big night, the New Zealand election. We decide who is going to be our government and who's going to lead us forward for the next few years. We've got these videos sorted for you to help you make an informed decision on which party you want to vote for. So please enjoy. This is David Seymour, the leader of the ACT Party, talking to Andrew Urquhart.
David Seymour, kia ora, thank you for joining us.
Morena.
Now, your involvement with politics, what motivated you to start a political career?
Well, actually, I was just giving a speech this morning at my old school assembly, and that's where a lot of it started. Mr. Morris, who at that time was the Auckland Grammar headmaster, walked out and he said, "Tomorrow I'm going to England to bring back the Cambridge exam." And I sat there as a kid, watching this battle between the principal of my school and the Minister of Education at the time, Trevor Mallard. And it was the first time that I thought, sometimes government doesn't always have our best interests at heart. I started questioning why the government was battling our community and our values. In our school, we believed that having rigorous exams was important, that a standards-based assessment system wouldn't work, and you shouldn't be able to go through school without sitting an exam. And that got me asking about choice in school, choosing to go to a different school. I'm from Whangarei. I went to boarding school in Auckland. That was an important choice for me. The government was trying to undermine it. And that set me along a path of questioning that eventually got me into politics. And on the side of politics that questions whether government can always spend our money best and always knows what's best for us, and that quite naturally led me into the ACT Party.
Was there anything in particular about ACT where you think that's a fit for where I'm coming from in terms of my values and ideology?
Yeah, it is, because we believe that your efforts should make a difference. We believe that in a country that is 0.8% urbanised, it's a tragedy that we've actually banned people from being able to build homes for themselves. I think that the way that we've gone about planning our cities is wrong. It's led to a shortage of housing. People should be able to make a difference in their own lives. Choice in education. People have a range of different worldviews. Why shouldn't you be able to choose the education that best extends you? So I'm really proud of what we've done with partnership schools. And I like being a bit of an outsider and a bit of an underdog. I think that our democracy is enriched by having smaller parties that bring ideas to the table. And I've actually published a book this election, which no other party leader has done, because I think that we have an obligation to put our ideas on the table, have them tested and scrutinised, and show that we've actually got the best plan for New Zealand.
The campaign so far, in some ways, some have commented that it's a bit of a tough campaign, particularly when there's so much happening on the sidelines. It's difficult to get the space to get your point of view across or to put forward policies. Have you found that?
Yeah, I have. Look, I mean, Materia Ture basically committed political kamikaze, and I think she will take the Green Party out of Parliament as a result. I think they'll be under 5%. But that absorbed 2 weeks of the media cycle when people would like to be debating housing and education, tax, among other things. The Labour Party's rolling of Andrew Little and bringing in Jacinda Ardern, that's taken up a couple of weeks. And then Winston Peters decides to tell everyone that he hasn't been filling out a superannuation form properly, and that's taken up another week. So, there's 5 weeks of talking basically about personal scandals and personalities, when what I think people in New Zealand want is to solve real problems. How do we build enough homes? How do we make sure that the next generation can get an education that equips them for the next century? How can we, or the century we're in, the 21st century, how do we make sure that our prison population doesn't keep mushrooming when we get prisoners learning to read? Those are practical problems that people face every day that really ought to get some more attention than they have so far in the election. I set them out in my book, and hopefully it'll get a bit more attention.
Now, in terms of the campaign so far, I imagine your focus is on Epsom. That's what you need to be back in Parliament, is to win the Epsom electorate. Lots of door knocking, talking to the local people.
Well, I've worked really hard in Epsom over 3 years. I've had 2,500 people have come through my office. Some of them you can help with a phone call. Others I've been battling beside my constituents against various bureaucracies for up to 2 years and running. So that's really been the work in Epsom. In this campaign, I'm certainly getting out and knocking on doors and asking my neighbours to return me to Parliament. That's critical to ACT, it's critical to me, but it's also critical to the government and the future of a centre-right government. Epsom voters are some of the most intelligent voters in New Zealand, and they get that they can use their vote strategically to elect me and help the centre-right. However, I've got a second job as the leader of the ACT Party, and that's getting up and down the country. So far this week I've been in Queenstown, I've been in Hawke's Bay, I've been in Auckland, and telling people ACT doesn't need to make 5%. You know, we need to make 1.2% of the party vote. That's an extra ACT MP. 2% of the party vote, that's a third ACT MP. And with an election this close, how well ACT does may be critical to the outcome.
How difficult is that balancing act, being the leader of a party, being the sole representative of the ACT Party in Parliament, but also wanting to be a good local MP in and out of the campaigning cycle? Well,
you know, no one's ever done it before that I'm aware of, has gone into Parliament entirely by themselves, led a party, then become part of the government with a role as an Under-Secretary, and then you've got to, you know, your first duty is always to your electorate and winning your seat and making sure that people feel that they can, you know, respect you as their local representative. And then I've got to build a party. So, you know, it is a challenge, but, you know, I have to do it because I think that ACT's values deserve to be represented in Parliament. They deserve a growing representation in Parliament. Whether or not we do is up to the voters, but my job is to make sure I get the choice across to them.
When it comes to your party's values and also its policies, what would you see to be the key policy platforms for ACT?
Well, it's definitely housing. I mean, we've got a major failure of bureaucracy that has left us with a country that's, you know, one of the least urbanised countries on the planet. We're very, very low population density, and yet we find ourselves with a shortage of urban land, a shortage of houses, and there's just so many consequences to that. You know, you've got a generation of people retiring in the next 20 years with record low home ownership rates. Now, you can survive pretty well on a pension if you own your home, if not, very difficult. That's a problem. We've got kids getting moved from school to school, from auntie to uncle, because they don't have secure accommodation, and it's hard for teachers to teach a different group of kids every term, but that's what some schools are facing. We've got the issue of a whole generation of younger people who, you know, they're worried about owning their future. They're worried about the security in their future because they're not sure that they're going to be able to secure a patch of New Zealand like previous generations did when the house price income ratio is, you know, 10 years income to buy a house in Auckland. Mm-hmm. So that's the number one issue. And, you know, there's no point in taxing it. No one's ever built more houses so they could pay more tax. There's no point blaming the foreigners. Our population actually grew faster in the middle of the 20th century, you know, 3% population growth back then. Even with immigration, it's only 2% now. So, you know, it's not tax, it's not immigration, it's the fact that we are building half as many homes as we built in the 70s, half as many homes as the baby boomers built at the peak home buying age in the mid-70s. If we don't start building more homes, and it should be easy, right? We've got way better technology, there's more of us, and there's more desperation to build them. The difficulty is that the Resource Management Act has made it almost impossible to free up land, and the funding of infrastructure is insufficient. So even if you did have freed up land, you don't necessarily have the pipes and the roads and things to go to them. So the ACT Party says, you know, the number one priority for the next government is say the Resource Management Act is a dog. We must replace it, and we must have an Urban Development Act that prioritises home building. And secondly, we need a way to get money to councils to build more infrastructure. So, you know, we would give half of the GST on construction to the local council that issues the consent so they can build the infrastructure to those new homes. That's fundamental. But the second thing is education. You know,
if we can ask a question on the housing issue. It would be fair to say, though, that in terms of the increase of value in houses, everyone in Epsom is now a millionaire, just about, that your constituency has perhaps done best from the Auckland housing bubble than anywhere else in the country. You don't want to penalise them for that?
Well, I don't think so, but I'll tell you what people in Epsom are saying to me on the doorstep. They're saying, I'm happy my house is worth $1 million or $2 million or even $3 million. You know, obviously that makes you feel good. But they also know that if they sold that house, they'd just have to buy again in the same market, so they're not much better off. What they're really worried about is that Epsom is the education electorate. It is filled with people who are there to be in a particular school zone because they have kids.
Yep.
And so they're saying, well, 20% deposit you need now on $1 million house. I'm not sure how my kids are going to get $200,000. So, it's actually gone full circle. People understand that the asset inflation doesn't really help them in the long term, but they do understand it disadvantages their kids, and that's why it's the #1 issue in the election, and the Epsom electorate as elsewhere.
Charter schools has been a part of the ACT platform for, a number of seasons, if you like. That's still very much front and centre?
Absolutely. Look, I visited 2 partnership schools this week, Vanguard Military School in Albany, Te Aratika down in Hawke's Bay, and those schools are changing kids' lives for the better. We had a hypothesis, we had a theory that if we opened up applications from talented edupreneurs, as we call them, entrepreneurs in education, then people would come forward and start schools that would better engage kids than what were already there. A lot of these kids, they may have been enrolled at a school, but they weren't attending very often. Now you go to the schools and you see in their eyes the genuine self-esteem that comes from real achievement, and that is magical. We need to do more of it. I know we need people like Sir Michael Jones running more schools. We need people like Sita Salupe running more schools. We need people like Nick Hyde from the Vanguard Military School, now one of the top 10 schools in Auckland, even though many of the kids there will tell you that they'd previously checked out of education. That's what we need more of.
Your bill before the House at the moment, and still before the House, before the election campaign, some people call it the euthanasia bill. Is that central to who you are as a party and who you are as a person? Well,
it is an important policy for ACT. And just to give a bit of background, this is something that 75% of New Zealanders would like to see happen. That's not just one poll, that's consistent public opinion polling. This is something that the New Zealand courts have said Parliament must act on. This is something that I think morally it's wrong that we allow people to suffer. We allow people to commit suicide, which some sadly do. We allow people to be given a little bit too much morphine by their doctor, but we don't allow them to make their own choice when they're very sick under a legal mechanism. And what I'd say particularly to a Christian audience is that this is not black and white. There's many people in the Christian community, many leaders in the Christian community, whether it's Glenn Cardy up at the St Luke's community, further afield, whether it's Desmond Tutu, who's a strong supporter after he watched his friend Nelson Mandela suffer and die, or whether it is Jerry Brown, the governor of California, a trained Jesuit who examined his conscience and signed the Californian assisted dying bill into law. There's actually quite a range of views within spiritual thinking.
In terms of the views here in New Zealand, where are things at with the bill? Because there was a report back to Parliament before we broke for the elections. What's the if you like, the status of that piece of legislation at the moment?
So, parliamentary process will make this as painless as possible. Yeah. Basically, my bill is on the order paper, and it's about number 6 right now. And we don't really know how fast those 5 bills ahead of it will proceed. But I would say that, we will probably see it debated either at the end of this year or near the start of next year. If I'm not back in Parliament, then potentially some other MP will take the bill on. If I am back in Parliament, it will remain in my name.
In terms of deals with coalition partners, and we'll get into more of that specifically, but just on this bill, is this a part of the confidence and supply that you'd say, I'd like you to back me on this bill if you want me to be part of your government?
No, this is quite different from most bills. So partnership schools, absolutely that's the deal. In a future coalition, reforming the housing market, infrastructure funding and resource management, that would be part of the deal. The assisted dying bill is quite different in that it's a conscience vote. Parties generally don't whip their MPs to vote in a particular way. What they generally do is that they let them have a free vote on their conscience. So MPs go back to their electorates, they think about their own values and they make a decision.
A final area of policy that perhaps ACT is known for, and that is law and order, the three strikes bill. Do you think that's been effective at bringing about the sort of change that you would have hoped in terms of law and order in New Zealand?
Well, certainly it's quite early days for three strikes because the way it works is your first strike you get a normal prison sentence, your second strike you get a normal prison sentence. If you commit a third violent or sexual crime, then you get the maximum sentence. Now, only one person has actually managed to commit enough crime in the last 7 years to get to the third strike. So as more people get to the end of the road, it will start to take people off the streets and make sure the worst offenders can't get out there and hurt more people.
Given how long it's taken for that process to go, if you like, through the three cycles, is it enough of a deterrent, do you think?
Well, certainly on the deterrent front, people have analysed the statistics of how likely were people to reoffend before three strikes and how likely are they to reoffend now. And what's been found is that people are reoffending less in the last 7 years since they got a strike notice than they did in the 7 years prior to the three strikes legislation. So, that would indicate it is having a deterrent effect.
Difficult to find a causal link, but yes, I appreciate this.
Well,
Statistics are on your side. Yeah.
Lies, damn lies and statistics, but the ones we have suggest it's working. Yeah. What I would say, though, is that it's all well and good to be tough on crime. We need to be smart on crime. And so another policy that we're pushing at this election is sort of a complement to three strikes. And it's that actually if people improve themselves in prison, if they learn to read, get a driver's licence, because half of them are illiterate, half of them are back within 4 years, no coincidence. We're going to say if you learn to read in prison, we will actually reduce your sentence by 6 weeks a year. And that empowers all of the volunteers, wonderful people volunteering to help prisoners learn to read. It motivates the prisoners, it motivates corrections, it orients the whole organisation towards actually getting prisoners upskilled so they're less likely to reoffend.
In terms of coalition partners now, of course, you have this special arrangement with the National Party, the deal without the teapot, if you like. But the other coalition partners that the current government have aren't doing so well this election campaign. At this stage of the proceedings, you might be the last one standing, do you think?
Well,
literally?
We'll see how the voters go. I mean, the important thing for ACT is that, I win Epsom, and we're working very hard on that. The polls have me 16 points ahead, but, a week's a long time in politics. Yeah. That means we don't need to make that 5% threshold. And if we get another couple of ACT MPs in from people up and down the country saying, look, actually I'm going to give my party vote to ACT this time, then that may well make up for the demise of Peter Dunn and the potential demise of the Māori Party. And it may well be what saves this government. But also for people who think the government's been weak on housing, well, I actually agree with that. I don't agree with them on everything. So a vote for ACT is saying, look, we quite like Bill English, but I don't think this government's done enough on housing. That's what you're voting for and that's what you're getting with ACT.
Could you work with others in Parliament?
Look, maybe in the long term. There's been times in our history when the Labour Party actually has been the best choice for New Zealand. In fact, ACT was founded by people from that fourth Labour government. But we're not in one of those times right now. I mean, everyone likes Jacinda Ardern, but when you listen to her, it's not really clear what any of the details are. It's just, I'm charismatic, vote me in, we'll do a tax review, we'll probably tax you more, maybe not, we don't know. Business and households in New Zealand can't deal with that sort of uncertainty, and so I can't support them either.
In terms of faith and the role of church in society, as I'm sure you're aware, Shine TV, the Rhema Network, we have a lot of Christians in our constituency. Do you see faith and the church having a key role in New Zealand society?
Oh, absolutely critical. I mean, ACT, we're a classical liberal party. We believe that free people, they're not all atomised individuals, they form a number of organisations where people can support each other and achieve common goals. Sports clubs are an example of that, families are an example of that, friendships are an example of that, but so are societies such as churches. And I think the church in New Zealand does an enormous amount of good. I'm always very honoured to be invited, for instance, to Holy Trinity, the largest cathedral in the Epsom electorate, to do a reading at Easter and be part of that community. And I'd also say that throughout history, Christianity has been an amazing force for good. You know, you look at the abolition of slavery, well, you know, William Wilberforce's Amazing Grace, you know, that was driven by a Christian revelation that man is made in the image of God and therefore has certain inalienable rights. Same with the US Civil Rights Movement. That basic idea that every person is special and therefore has a set of rights and liberties has been critical to getting our society to where we are today. So I fully support, you know, the role that the church has played and will continue to play in making New Zealand the place that it is.
Just finally on this one, for people that are watching who are perhaps undecided, now I appreciate that a lot of your focus is on Epsom, but for those people who would perhaps consider ACT as their party vote, why should they do so?
Oh, I think because you basically like the idea of the government we've got, but you need something else. You need a bit more impetus on these long-term issues of housing and education. And these are areas where ACT can deliver. We've shown it with partnership schools. We'd like to do a lot more with education. We've been consistently saying, look, we support this government, but we don't support them on housing. We need to reform the Resource Management Act. In fact, we need to replace it with an Urban Development Act. We need to change the funding of infrastructure. Otherwise, we're just not going to build more homes by tinkering. If you believe that basically the government's not bad, but you want action on issues such as that, then you might consider giving a party vote to ACT. Giving us a few more MPs will potentially have a very big effect on the direction of New Zealand after this election.
David Seymour, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and hopefully it made it a little bit easier in making up your mind about who you want to support in the upcoming election. We invited a bunch of these politicians down to talk about their parties and what they stand for, and you can see all of those videos at lifefm.co.nz. On top of that, there's heaps of other resources there about voting, sorting yourself out, and just figuring out the whole process, right? Because sometimes it can seem just a little bit much. Anyway, check it out, lifefm.co.nz.